is our annual Harrison Smith Legacy and Civic Engagement Forum, where we recognize the significant contributions that Bill Smith made to the Columbus community. Please help me to thank sponsors Smith & Hale, the Robert Weiler Company, and Smoot Construction, and our partner, the Urban Land Institute Columbus, for their support. I'd like to present our speakers here today. Our speakers today represent a deep range of experience and knowledge in the art, the science, and the purpose of architecture and creating compelling public spaces. They are leaders of Insight2050, a collaborative initiative that aims to help Central Ohio communities proactively plan for development and population growth over the next 35 years. And this period is expected to be dramatically different from the past. They will discuss their findings and outline what could be our collective future. Joining us are Keith Myers, Vice President of Physical Planning and Real Estate at The Ohio State University, Steve Shoney, Director, Department of Development, the City of Columbus, Kyle Katz, President of Katz Development, and Yaromir Steiner, Founder and CEO, Steiner and Associates. Yaromir will provide an overview of Insight2050, then Kyle will take the podium as our panel discussion host. Please welcome all of our speakers. Yaromir, the podium is yours.
Well, thank you all for having me here today. And you noticed his problems pronouncing my name. And with a name like this, I have to spell it all the time. Sometimes I wish my name was John. You know, it would be. In fact, when I order and they ask my name, I always say John, Pat, or something like this. Because thank you for having me here. And I have a big challenge in front of me. And three major problems. The first one I already addressed, the accent. So I will try to speak slow so you understand what I'm saying. But that's come from a background of being born in Turkey, educated in France, and here about 30 years ago. And, but also because we have a very good group of specialists here who will then be able to clarify the confusion I create with this presentation. The second challenge we have is something that Ben from his firm, I'm going to quote him. Actually, he quoted Lincoln, and that was a very good quote. He said, "Give me an hour, I can speak with 3 minutes of preparation. Give me 10 minutes, I need 3 days." The subject we need to cover is very complex, so it's going to be very difficult to try to give you the details of this. But for that, internet was invented, and I really would like you to go back to the Insight2050.org, Insight2050.org, and you will have all this information in full detail. And if genuinely are interested in what I'm going to say, you owe to yourself and study this. You can just print out the report, read it on paper if you're not computer literate, but all the information is there. And then the final challenge is we have no audiovisual. I understand that that's the tradition in this club, in these luncheons, and it's like trying to teach algebra without pencil and paper, because this thing is full of statistics and numbers and bar charts. So you'll have to trust that what I'm telling you is the truth. I won't be able to prove it objectively on a chart. Now, so what is Insight2050? This is a joint effort, and I would like to repeat that, of Urban Land Institute, MORPC, the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Organization, and Columbus2020, an odd group. You have the regional infrastructure planners, then you have the Urban Land Institute, who is a land use private organization, and then you have Columbus2020, the economic development arm, of the region. So why those people get together and why are we doing this? Is basically, it started by a conversation at the ULI. Urban Land Institute is very interested in the success of public-private ventures, because we noticed years ago that many great projects in the United States happen, and in Columbus there are many examples of them, from downtown to Easton to Polaris, when public-private work together. But also Urban Land Institute identified that if that planning could happen a little bit upstream, not waiting to the project level, but start working at a regional level, it could be maybe as effective at a larger scale. That means that can we plan together private-public and think about the future rather than letting the public do it by itself? And then we said, how can we do this? And then we're very lucky. There were federal dollars available sitting on MORPC's bank account, coffers. I don't know how they keep those dollars. And then, but they needed a match. So with the help of Columbus Partnership and individual business people, we raised the $100,000 we needed, and then matching it with the $400,000 from the feds. Here we are. We did Insight2050's first phase. What are we trying to do in this work? Well, as you know, we all have dreams about how our communities should look. Some of us love what's happening downtown right now. Some other people prefer the 1-acre lots and the horse farm neighborhoods, you know, Powell, downtown, and everything in between. Most of those choices lead to very heated debates. You know, people support one way of living versus another way of living and would like to change rules and regulation to the one thing instead of another. You know, the notion of public transit, is it a good thing or a bad thing? And how do you do it? Does it cost too much money, too little money? But it depends what your opinion is. And those debates were unending. And at the Urban Land Institute, at one of our governance committee meetings, we were talking about this, and we said, wouldn't that be interesting if we could quantify the financial consequences of the choices we are talking about, instead of picking one or another solution? And basically, we, through a RFP that the MORPC helped us organize, we selected a firm who does exactly that. That is what they say. We look into the future. We look at the different development patterns, and I will describe them to you in a minute. And then we measure the consequences of those patterns and see what kind of impact they have on infrastructure costs, on taxes, on miles driven, on on pollution, on health cost and things like that, and water consumption, electrical consumption, and so forth. And then so that way we can make decisions. Well, and I remember there was a moment of truth in that meeting. We said, well, because we all had kind of our individual preferences, what if the conclusion was not quite what we thought it was going to be? Then what do we do? Well, at the ULI, we kind of promised ourselves that whatever the logical conclusions were, then that's what we're going to be supporting and pushing for. So with that, we approached the MORPC, and we had a very enlightened leader there, William, and with his help and with the German efficiency of Kristen, we basically started this effort. She always blushes when I say that, but when you work with her, you really understand what I'm saying. So we basically put together this effort, and it took about 6 months of work. We hired a firm, Peter Calthorpe, internationally renowned expert on the subject, to help us make that analysis. So, on your tables, unfortunately, we wanted more prints, but the Metropolitan Club ran out of money, so you only have 2 per table. And we are supposed to have 5 per table. So that is the very quick summary of everything which is on the webpage. So please go to the webpage, Insight2050.org, and read what is on it. But I'm going to try to give you the gist of it. The first thing is, what is the big ideas? The number one big idea, which was not our initiative, this information we received from an expert that was hired, is that Central Ohio will grow by about 500,000 people in the next 30 years. We are the only place in Ohio that's growing. 500,000 people is lots of people. 500,000 people, right, in the next 30 years. That's a big number. So how are we going to lodge them is really the question. The second big idea is that growth will be very different. That was very briefly mentioned in the introduction, but this difference is huge. If you look at what happened in the last 30 years, for example, the household without children were 31%. That number, the household without children, will go to 28%, so it'll be less of them. So you're going to tell me 31 to 28% big deal over 30 years? Why are we even mentioning it? Well, the big important thing is that, so in this 30-year period, to get from that number to that number, only 20% of new households will be in that childless category, household without children. So what's happening is, with children, it's the reverse. So what's happening is, in the next 30 years, the cohort who is coming is very different from the cohort we have right now. So that means there'll be much older people, that this new group is coming, many single-family households, many more of them. So if you are planning your cities and your environments, in the model of the last 30 years and you say we are going to need single-family household neighborhoods, representing 40% of the demand, 50% of the demand, you are planning for the wrong demographics. The demographics that are coming, and it's not a preference, that's not a choice, that's the reality, that's the children we make, is a totally different picture, much less families with children coming in the next 30 years. So if you take those ideas and you apply them to all the parameters that we gathered from the community, we said, okay, now we have all the information, all the tools, we have those demographics, and let's look at 4 scenarios. We call them A, B, C, and D, and I'm using the same vocabulary as on the report you have. A is we repeat what we have done in the last 30 years. That's one scenario. So, give you an idea, if you do that, we will need another, 500 square miles of land. City of Columbus, 250, total metropolitan area, 1,000. So we'll add 500 more acres of farmland becoming urban. As an example. Solution B, hypothesis, is that what is in the books? Actually, the city is already planning slightly different than the past. And that's the assumption B, which is what is in the plans right now, which might not take into account the demographic changes of our region, but at least, it's clearly going in the right direction. The third scenario is the focused approach, where we say, if we responded instantaneously to the demographic changes that are happening, that we exactly do what we need to do, and the scenario D is, the government says, wow, that looks good, can we make it even better? Then there's some political, tightening of things. So these are the scenarios A, B, C, and D. And you are going to, on that sheet you have in front of you, and this is where I'm going to cut my presentation short, you will see at least the areas we are looking at. The things we are going to look at is going to be land consumption. I already told you that. We live on 1,000 square miles. We need 500 square miles, or all the way down to 15 more square miles, which is nothing. So these are choices that we can make and organize ourselves so we can determine how much farmland we want to convert into cities. There is fiscal impacts. The difference between the top number and the bottom number, I don't want to quote too quickly here. It's about $300 million difference, I think. The transportations, annual transportation miles, we can go, repeating the past, to 16 billion miles, 15 billion or 12 billion miles, or only 11 billion miles. Now, if you can stick with scenario C, the 12, that's the same miles we are driving right now. That means that our infrastructure can handle the next 500,000 people without major capital investments. We can talk about public health costs. You say, how do you calculate health costs? Well, fine particles in the air, lung problems, respiratory diseases, etc., and those can be quantified based on national statistics. You can save about $300 million between scenario A and scenario C. Building energy uses, 4 quadrillion BTUs versus 4.3 quadrillion BTUs. Gallons of gas, 3.2 trillion gallons versus 3 trillion. Please go through these numbers. Household costs. If you take the fuel, insurance, maintenance, energy, and water costs, it can go from $13,000 per new household down to $6,800 per new household. This is a huge difference, $7,000 difference per household if we select one or another formula. So as I told you, it's very difficult to do this, without having the charts and the exact numbers. So please go and look at this. What's the conclusion of all this, so then the group can take it from here, is that, this is huge, so what do we do? Because these are big statistics. We're not telling you what to build where. This is the region. So, but who makes the decision? Each city, each municipality. As you know, our planning system is very piecemeal. Every county, every township, every city has to do their own decisions. And so the future steps we are trying to take as a group is to bring those tools at a level of decision-making organizations. For example, can we do now a specific study on one of the attached cities? I call attached city Whitehall, Grove City, Westerville, etc. Or can we pick a county seat? Can we take Lancaster? Can we take Newark and make a study maybe for them as an example to serve for everybody else? Or can we look at corridors, around Delaware County, for example, where you have development corridors? Can we study those? Because we need them to get more specific, make those studies so that people then can make their decisions. My final comment is, and that's a little bit of a political comment, but because I have the accent, I can say things that many people cannot, and is that, when you are selecting your political leaders in our communities, especially those who have power on land use decisions, Make sure you pick people who are competent on the subject. The most important thing is not to negotiate with the police unions. The most important thing is not to pick the potholes. The most important thing is not to salt the roads, is what we do for land use in our communities. These are things who are 50, 100 years later, our children, our grandchildren, their children will live with the consequences of the decisions we are going to make. So basically that shows, I mean, obviously Urban Land Institute is happy I see our table. Urban Land Institute thinks that land use is the critical decision which then impacts everything else, how we live, the quality of our life, and economic development. One last thing, and this is that we find out, and I'm speaking for Columbus 2020 here a little bit, that economic development is not about attracting businesses and then put people in them to work. Economic development today is to create places where people want to live, so the companies then come there because their employees are in that location. Our old generation, I'm a baby boomer, we would go where the work was, and then we'll create our lives around. The X and Ys now are picking where they want to live, and they expect the businesses to come to them. So if you want economic development, you have to make Columbus a great place to live. Thank you.
Our time is short, our topic large, so we'll get right to it. I'll ask all three, starting with Keith. What is your big takeaway from Insight 2050, and how does it affect what you do?
Well, thanks for having me lead off, Kyle. You know, I thought what was staggering was just the change in the cohort. How the it's clear that Columbus is going to grow. I think people knew that. That's great. But the way it's going to grow and the people that are going to be here growing it are going to be so different than over the last 30 years. And I thought that was a big takeaway. And I don't know how it changes so much what I do. It changes a little bit about how I think about things. You know, I'm fairly certain that you know, the suburbs and the areas of the city that are successful now will be successful in the future. But there's parts in both suburbs and cities that I wonder how they're going to fare with that kind of a cohort moving in. And for example, I use the old commercial strips built in the 80s, you know, Bethel Road and, you know, if you go out on the east side, Tussing Road and out in those areas, you know, I don't know what the future of those are with that kind of a cohort moving in, who's really more interested in kind of urban hip spaces. What happens to those? And I don't know.
Steve?
So when I first heard the preliminary stuff coming out of the Insight 2050 report, the two things that stuck with me were the juxtaposition of two statistics. One was the 500,000 new people in the metropolitan area. Combine that with the projection that we're actually going to have as many as 40,000, I think the number is, excess large lot single family homes in the market. That juxtaposition, to me, captures very succinctly everything that's changing. So how does that change what we do? It changes everything we do at the city. Because the other thing that it does is to put what Yaromir said about the change in economic development a little differently. It really is the merging of community development and economic development, where the combination of residential, office in particular, and retail of different varieties, whether it's I'm trying to quote Yaromir here, and doing it with him here is a little intimidating.
Try the accents.
Yeah. I would try, but if there was only 100 people in the room, I might try with the accent. The luxury versus necessity retail. Did I get that right? Thank you. I was listening to that presentation you did. Making sure that you've got that right balance and you have the retail in the right place, and having those three pieces move together is fundamental to everything we're looking at, whether it's downtown or at Easton or at Polaris or in the far northeast or clear out at Hayden Run. The city of Columbus is not just downtown. It's all the areas that Keith mentioned. It's those areas that I mentioned, and it's downtown. So we're looking at how we have that mix with every single project that we do.
Yaromir, your big takeaway, how it affects what you do?
You know, my takeaway is that we are lucky. I'm very excited that finally we are starting focusing on really what's important in land use and how it ties to economic development. It's not an aesthetic consideration divorced from economic interests. Actually, the two are totally aligned, and that's very, very important to me. And also looking at Columbus or the Central Ohio region as a mosaic of communities, each of them will have that balance. That is that we can very rarely become specialized. I live in New Albany, and I can see now how we need absolutely to create that higher density environments in order to keep, people like my son who come out of college and they want to live here, not in New Albany, because there's no place to live and there's no place for his kind of companies to exist. And then I want also that people who retire, the empty nesters, who continue to living in the community, so we have a lifelong community. And I think that applies to Grove City, to Westerville, to Newark, to everywhere. And I think that's going to totally transform the way we live and we organize our communities. And I think that's a plus.
Great. Keith, I want to drill down on something that Yaromir was speaking of. Nearly 80% of the people that fueled the growth of the past few decades came from the cohort that's 35 to 64 years old. That group will only comprise 30% of the growth anticipated by 2050. Aging baby boomers will make up about 45% of our growth. Those under 35 will account for more than 25%, and households with children comprise less than 20%. First, do these projections surprise you? And then second, what does this mean for the built environment going forward? How will this change what we're going to see as options for people as they move to Columbus?
Well, first, I thought it was astonishing, actually, and it'll have a huge impact because, we can write all the zoning laws and things we want. At the end of the day, the market's going to drive what gets built, and the market's going to be different. The market is going to reward. There'll be cities who understand this and get out ahead of the curve, and they're going to be the winners. There'll be those who, think everything that happened 20 years ago is what's going to happen in the next 20 years, and they won't. And you're going to see I think, a major sea change in the built environment.
Touching on that also, Steve, Keith just referenced zoning codes. Do the current zoning codes, do the current building codes allow for the density that's anticipated by this report? Must change take place within our code system?
I'm looking at Vince Pasadero for the answer to that question. Feels like a city council member, or city council meeting. I'd like to call Mr. Pasadero up to answer that question. The short answer is no, but that doesn't mean we don't sort of figure it out along the way. It's what we have to do. We have to be creative and flexible. And, there's one thing I'll say is, and as I was listening to the comments that Yaromir was making, it's not just about the zoning code, but one thing that I'll say is when companies or developers or whoever come to us and say, we want city assistance doing this, we are now in a position where we're saying, that's great. If you want our assistance to build this road or run the sewer line or get this variance, you're going to do these things that fit with what we're looking at in terms of the future market in exchange for that. So in other words, if you want to develop your property under the terms that are there and you can and the market will bear it, I believe in the market, go do what the market will bear. If you need government involvement, you're going to have to pay attention to some of these principles in a very significant way.
Thank you. Please.
I would like to add something to this. I am developing in Cincinnati right now, and a big project like Easton. And I was in a zoning hearing, and someone who had a property about half a mile on our main street came for a zoning change. He had houses on it, and he wanted to get apartment zoning to create density, and he used the whole job creation, our project, to justify that. And he got the vote, and he presented his project, which was 8 or maybe 10 units an acre. I was shocked. At the meeting, I wanted to get up and speak, against the project, not because of the zoning change, but because of the low density. The city was feeling that they're making a big favor to the developer, giving him the 8 to 10 units an acre, which was not restricted by zoning. The switch would have allowed him to go to higher density, but he was very happy to get his 10 units. And this is where the powers to be have the courage to say, so you are taking 25 acres, putting 8 units per acre, so it will take another 25 acres of farmland to put another 200 units, where you could have put all of them on those 25 acres within literally walking bicycle distance from the town center I'm creating. So it's not only zoning change, it's also the political understanding that these are not bad things, that density is going to be a good thing for what we are doing here. And for that, it's education. I mean, since we created that committee, we have been going to the counties, to the townships, to the mayors, and keep telling them, repeating the story, explaining so they understand what's going on. And there's always some resistance. Are you sure? What about my schools and things like that? But it's not only zoning; it's also the understanding of those issues. Like our future mayor will have to understand what we are talking about.
Let's talk about that for a second. Keith, you've been a major player as it relates to Mayor Coleman's work over the past 15 years. You've sat at the table when a lot of the projects that will be his legacy were created. Talk to us, given this new situation, about what we should be looking for as proponents of Insight 2050 from a new mayor.
Well, this is
Steve's not going to get this question.
this is not an endorsement for any particular mayoral candidate. The university would kill me. No, I think, there's another way to look at it, which I think is interesting. If you look at cities that have really transformed themselves over a period of time, and one I'm particularly familiar with is Charleston, South Carolina. When I started going to Charleston back in the late 70s and early 80s, it was a very different place than it is today. And a lot of those cities, that Indianapolis, there's others you could point to that have transformed themselves over a period of time, have done so with consistent political leadership. Okay, so some may argue Mayor Riley in Charleston has lasted too long. He's 20-some years or something or more. But you can't. It's good to have a mayor who's committed to be the mayor, because it's hard to get the kinds of projects done that we've done in Columbus over the last 16 to 20 years if people are thinking in 4-year segments. And I think where Columbus has clearly profited under Mayor Coleman's leadership, it's been because he wants to be mayor. And I hope that the next mayor, whomever he or she is, has that same commitment.
Great, thank you. Anything either of you two want to add? Steve, I'm leaving you. Steve, let's give you one that's really in your wheelhouse. We're talking about a lot of growth, 500,000 new people. Let's talk infrastructure. Are we prepared for that? Yaromir touched on it. But are we prepared for, and this is kind of the I-670 at 5:45 in the evening question. Do we have the roads? Do we have the utility capacities? And what are we going to have to undertake in order to achieve that if we don't now?
No, the short and easy answer is no. The whole point of the study is that there are multiple paths, and each of those different paths provide a different level of challenge to doing that. But no, I mean, we don't have the infrastructure. Looking at Cleveland, we don't have enough parking in downtown. Well, we have enough parking for today. We don't have enough parking for tomorrow. We have too many cars. Thank you. We don't have enough. I was going there. We don't have enough transportation options for downtown. We don't have enough transportation options for Easton, frankly, or Polaris, or any of the other places, or Dublin. So we need to do more for that, and that's going to take investment. It's going to take a lot of investment. And one of my I'm going to go on a tangent here. One of the things that, as a leader in a city, I worry about is our ability to make those investments because of changes that happen, frankly, at the State House, with changes that happened in municipal tax structures. So that the state legislature is getting ready to pass a bill that's going to simplify. Ike Stage is over there nodding. I'm waiting for the amen from Ike. that's going to simplify municipal tax, which is a great objective. But at the same time, there are provisions in there that are, frankly, in 2016, going to mean that the city of Columbus has $10 to $20 million less capital improvement money.
Out of what pool? What general pool? What percentage decrease is that?
Oh, that's a really tough number. I would say let me put it this way, of the amount of money that I have to do, and the stuff we have to do, the fun projects, the projects that everybody wants us to do, is that excess. And so that means I'm looking out 2 years. I don't know how I'm going to do all the great projects that I think we have the ability to do, because cities are a one-trick pony as it comes to revenue now. It's all income tax revenue. And we get consistently changes at the state legislature level that don't understand, that don't seem to take into full account the impact on municipal finance and what that means for creating the great places that are necessary to our future. And it's a huge problem.
Yaromir, in preparing for this, I spoke to a number of people that were involved in the creation of the Insight2050 report. One of them said that Columbus's competitiveness going forward is tied directly to our ability to absorb the conclusions of this report. Do you agree?
No, I absolutely agree, because the infrastructure costs, obviously we don't have the infrastructure today, and we are going to have them. But I mean, do we build garages, or do we build ways so people can come to work without their cars? I mean, that's a big decision to make, and we have to make that decision intelligently, and you don't want to build garages first and then demolish them 20 years from now. Now we are going to public transportation paying for the same thing twice. So I think that it's absolutely essential. If you don't make Columbus a desirable place for people to come and live in, and Columbus has a really good reputation, things are really moving in the right direction. I mean, I'm very optimistic about Columbus. I see many other cities, and cities like Cincinnati, Cleveland, they are waking up, but they're not as awake as we are, and that's our edge. I mean, we really take advantage of what we are finding here and try to implement it. But I would like to say one thing. We have to be very humble about this. I don't want you to think that I speak with lots of assurance here, and my colleagues at MORPC and ULI do, that we have the solutions. We don't know. We just have a set of data, and now we are all wondering, okay, so what are we going to do next year, with no preconceived notion about where we are trying to go. So this is why anybody who wants to volunteer to help that thing through is going to be very beneficial to us. I mean, you have to participate to figure it out. I mean, you mentioned something about taxes. This has enormous consequences. I'm talking to one of the mayors, because now I talk to everyone, in the region. And the mayor says, well, the taxes come from, income taxes, and income taxes are paid where the offices are. And you are telling us the offices are going to go where people want to live. But to create the place they want to live, I need to create livable environments. And for that, I don't have any money, because creating livable environments doesn't get me any taxes. So, then we start asking the question, and I'm absolutely a neophyte on this. Well, maybe should the income taxes be divided between where people live and people work? So what I'm saying is these land use issues have consequences that we are just taking the measure of, and we are not even experts on this. We need attorneys, we need legislators, people to help us to think that through, because if that's important, then maybe we need to change the way income taxes are distributed or where they are collected. Mm-hmm. What's happening is now income taxes are collected where people work, but then how do you enhance the working environment, the living environment, if there's no tax resource available to the municipalities?
That's good. I'm going to stay with you for a minute. What does the conclusion of Insight2050 in terms of demographics mean to retail in Central Ohio over the next 30 years?
Oh, the change in demographics is not the important part. If you want to talk about retail, I can make a whole presentation on this, because demographics simply changes the categories of merchants you have. When the baby boomers were dominant, then you have, Talbots and soft surroundings and, Coldwater Creek and J. Jill's. When the X and Y's increase, then you have more H&M's and Zara's and, So we know how to adjust. We can move our mix to fit the demographic change. But what impacts us at a different level is really the whole role of the internet and how people spend their dollars. These changes are well beyond the demographic issues. They are tied together, but the fact that it changes from one group to another, we have been doing that for 100 years. We keep adjusting. But do we need malls? That's the question. Do we need concentrations like Easton, for example, in the future? is going to be all distributed to the village centers, for example. There'll be 100 small places rather than one big. I mean, we see clearly that malls, the old model of malls, the Eastland, Westlands are not an answer anymore. And Easton is more of an answer, but is it an adequate answer? So there are issues. I mean, like Easton today is looking at a major residential development effort, which will dwarf pretty much anything that has been done in one place. So,
Do we have hope for infill at the former retail meccas that existed, Northland, Eastland, Westland?
No. I mean, that is what's going to happen. I mean, today, we studied Northeast Columbus neighborhood because that's our neighborhood at Easton. And I mean, we can put 50 more thousand people there. I mean, not only in the parking lots. I mean, there's land everywhere. That's not the problem. We can, and those, I mean, there are books about, repairing, urban repair manuals. I mean, one of the examples is taking the strip centers and turning them into more. No, there's many opportunities.
When you get on the Insight2050.org site, and I hope you all do, Yaromir spoke of the 4 categories of development, one that starts with basically just continuing past trends, and it ramps up to maximum infill, maximum density. If we utilize 0 for past trends and 100 for maximum density, can you each give me a number at which you think we'll be traveling in the next 30 years? Are we going to be at 75%, 50%, 25%? Actually, give me 2 numbers. One, a projection of where we'll be, and the second, where you want us to be.
100 being
100 being maximum density, so that basically instead of using 500 square miles of land to grow, we'll use.
I think we should be at 90, and I think we'll be at 75.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. It won't be. It'll be somewhere if you look at all the different sort of growth options that are in there. I was looking at the most ambitious one and the second, but it'll be somewhere between, as Yaromir said, it won't be all the way up. It'll be somewhere around 75, I'd guess.
Steve?
I'm going to give an answer that might sound a little odd coming from the City of Columbus guy, but I think it depends on what happens in places like Delaware County, Union County, Dublin, which is I think making great strides in terms of sort of finding their way in this place and just made a fantastic decision in terms of a new city manager this week. I think it's going to depend on what happens in those areas. The echo chamber that we've got here downtown, I think gets it. But it's going to depend on how successful we are in translating this to these other areas. I think that's where the game is. And so I don't know enough to give you an answer.
Okay. One last question. We'll take about 2 minutes for that. Then this echo chamber has the opportunity to ask questions, which is our CMC tradition. If you'd like to start lining up, please do so. When you do, please give us your name. And don't editorialize. That's not from me, it's Jane Scott. I welcome editorialization. The final question while the queue is lining, what's the biggest threat to our city's ability to fulfill the potential that's revealed by Insight 2050? Keith?
I think it's transportation. I think it's a failure to recognize that cities have been shaped by transportation since their inception. And, we cannot grow the city in a way that's going to be meaningful or meet the aspirations of the 2050 or meet the data that the 2050 plans are presenting unless we come up with a transportation system that is going to support that. We cannot keep building freeway lanes and parking garages. If we do, we'll end up with a city we just don't like.
Thank you. Steve?
I'll go back to what I said earlier about the revenue problem. I think it's having revenue streams for municipalities and townships that really support the kind of development that we're looking for.
Great. Yaromir?
I mean, my fear is more political. That is, will we have community leaders who understand the importance of land use? For me, that's the biggest threat. If they understand it, then it will work.
Thank you. Please, questions?
Good afternoon. Mark Barbach with Finance Fund. First, a shameless plug. The award to Cristo Rey was a wonderful award today. I want to note that it was financed by New Markets tax credits from Finance Fund, among others. So just put that out there. I have an easy to answer question that follows on to the important data that's in the report, and that is what's the implication for our central city neighborhoods and second-tier suburbs. There was a lot of discussion in the dialogue of 2050 that I appreciated being part of that talked about the implication for various parts of the community. One of those areas in growth becomes the central city neighborhoods that are at the moment are suffering for a variety of issues, notably education and deteriorating housing. Your thoughts on what we ought to be thinking about in the context of improving those neighborhoods and the second-tier suburbs? Easy one.
I'll go first, and I'm going to start actually first with an acknowledgement for Mark and Boyce Safford, who were my two predecessors in my, Boyce, stand up. Who were my two predecessors in my job, who got this and worked this before anybody else. So thank you to you two. I guess what I would say is what the implications for those places are, as I see it, going to depend on whether or not families and individuals feel like they can invest there and have a quality neighborhood and have a quality place to send their kids to school and a quality environment. Some neighborhoods, you can see that. You can see that happening in Old Town East. You can see that happening. I think it's going to happen on the Near East Side with the great work we're doing on PACT. I think it's going to happen on the South Side. I think those first-tier suburbs, those second-tier suburbs are going to face some challenges because of the way the development was done. And I think places like Linden that are sort of cut off and don't have an anchor and don't have that direct tie are going to be a lot tougher. But I think there's opportunity, but we have to solve some of the structural problems and some of the real community problems, and that's hard work to solve.
I'm going to ask that one speaker address each question. Jay?
Hi, Jay Smith. Having been associated with the development business, residential development business for over 40 years, it's very obvious to me that it's not the developers who are responsible for so-called urban sprawl at all. It's the suburbs and the other zoning authorities that make these highly impactful zoning decisions without any regard for their regional impact or their impact on their neighbors, or especially on the impact to the core city. Aren't we being foolish not to have a regional land use approval authority as opposed to continuing to allow these suburbs and places like southern Delaware County to endorse huge lot development which just devours obscene amounts of farmland?
You want to, Keith? Keith?
Well,
We're going to get two answers on this.
this is the one. Accent. This is the one where the accent is going to help. Yeah, perfection is enemy of good. We can dream about this. It's not going to happen. So what is the second best thing we can do? So basically, you give objective information to the planning authorities and hope that they will make the decisions that are going to be, intelligent. We all look at Portland, Oregon. There are examples of better systems, but this is way out there. We speak to our brother, sister organization, ULI, Cincinnati, ULI, Cleveland, and so forth. We all dream about this, but that's not going to happen. So what can you do? You just give the information and hope that every authority will make the decision. And by the way, I don't think the concern is the regional impact of the decision made at a local level. What we are going to see now, that even at a local level, there's wisdom in that data that they need to use. If New Albany insists on keeping, the families with children and not have the young people and not have the old people, then basically they will get the biggest tax deficit families that there is. They will be, a house never pays enough taxes. It's better to have households who have no children and who pay taxes. So either they are going to slowly die, wither on the vine, or we are going to somehow manage to get those other categories, and that will apply to Grove City. What Dublin is doing is remarkable. Here is a community who swore against density. Today they are going totally the other direction, and they are trying to rethinking about creating that category that is missing. I see the same thing happening in Newark. I would have never thought that there was going to be a mayor who's going to say, we are going to fix the square around the we're going to create lofts. I mean, this is not vocabulary that we are used to here, you know, and I mean, I see Westerville, I mean, Whitehall. I mean, everybody now is rethinking what they are doing as they start seeing this data and they realize that they need to be responsive. So, I mean, again, perfection, enemy of good, you know.
Hi, Phil Sorrentino. I have a client that believes the next generation of urban development will be based around the concept of sustainability, and I haven't heard anything about that. Is that on anybody's radar, and if so, in what way?
I think, yeah, the sustainability question is a good one. It's, in a lot of ways, you know, I think the next generation is going to treat sustainability the way, you know, when I started out, we used to hand draw everything, and then we had AutoCAD, right? And I remember we used to charge extra for AutoCAD, right, because it was special. But, you know, I think that's how they'll look at sustainability, really. It'll be so much a part of a project's development and so ingrained in what people expect, what consumers expect, and what cities expect, that it's going to happen almost organically.
But I have to add something here. We only talked about sustainability today because the different land use models have a huge impact on water consumption, energy consumption, you know, air quality. I mean, I mean, you can do sustainability at a different scale. This is a regional scale sustainable model.
Thanks.
I'm Ken Thompson. I'm an architect. I design houses, small ones though.
No need for an apology.
In fact, you'll be in more demand if this report goes well.
I have a question. I advise clients that if you're currently in $1 million house in the exurbs, that you're not going to have someone to sell it to in the next 10, 15 years when you want to get out. What other strategies are there that those exurbs can do to make development in their own infill more possible? What I'm thinking are lot splits. At New Albany, let's say, can you piece off sides of yards? Same goes for other areas, Dublin, who knows where. But
No, okay. First, let's define what we are talking about. In this model, there are three types of housing densities. There's large lots, small lots, and attached. Small lots and large lots are all single-family housing, which still will represent the majority of housing. So what is small lot versus large lot? Small lot is over 6 units per acre. So if you are more than 6 units per acre, that's small lot. I mean, in Texas, they would think this is very, very dense. But over 6 units an acre is German villages, Italian village. I mean, we have those kind of neighborhoods, single family everywhere. So number one, so don't think that we're all going to live in apartments. I mean, still the majority will be single family homes, but lots will be smaller. The density will be more like the old parts of Columbus we know. And the second thing is the category of homes that are not going to be able to be sold. This if you persist in our errors. If you stick about the vision we are looking at and we keep the large lot home construction to approximately where it is, there'll be enough people for those units to circulate among themselves. We just don't, but if you start building big lots and that's all we do in the next 10 years, then yes, there's going to be a problem. Now, about taking lots and dividing them and so forth, this is really, I mean, that's a very fine-grained conversation. I mean, there are books about, you know, again, urban repair and so forth, but I think that we are addressing at a more strategic level here, and that would be almost a tactical solution which will not solve the big problem.
Hi, Eric Davies. So a few weeks ago, I spent several days in downtown Minneapolis, my first time in the Twin Cities, and was very impressed. And as founding board chair of Transit Columbus, obviously riding the light rail system was quite amazing and very exciting. But what impressed me most about the city, I think even more than the light rail, was one street about 10 blocks long called Nicollet Mall. And 40 years ago, the city of Minneapolis began to redesign this street to become completely oriented around pedestrian, traffic, and public transit. So the only things on Nicollet are buses and people, and lots of shops and businesses and lots of people. It is an urban phenomenon of revitalization in downtown, and my first thought was this could be our high street in downtown Columbus. and yet we are right now struggling with how do we get more cars on High Street and more parking. So as a region, does this, I mean, it's very symbolic, and they're taking next phases in Minneapolis on how to even redesign and improve Nicollet even more. So as a region, do we need to be thinking about doing something like this in downtown Columbus? And how can we change what we tell ourselves? And how could it have ripples throughout our entire Columbus region by doing something like that?
Can I make a joke first?
No, by all means. I mean,
No, if you ask Cleve, he'll tell you that sometimes it feels like the only thing on High Street is buses too. So we sometimes it feels like we have that already. But go ahead. You were going to give a real answer.
no, I think it's, Nicollet Mall was done by Larry Halpern, as you mentioned, 40 years ago, and it had it was pretty innovative, but it was done at a time in cities when we were busy closing streets everywhere. Constitution Mall in Hartford was one of the first times they closed a street, and what they were trying to do when they did that was emulate the shopping malls, and they introduced transit into Nicollet, and they've done the same thing in Denver at the 16th Street. And it's interesting. It has a place. I was just in Denver, and that sort of free bus service is along 16th is effective. But if you look at what it does from the city's perspective, it really concentrates activity just on 16th. So you go to 14th and it drops off significantly. And I appreciate Nicollet and I appreciate 16th Street and even the two closed streets that are malls that still succeed in this country. All the rest of them have been pretty much opened up, but Santa Monica's 3rd Street Promenade works, and Boulder, works as well, but they're the only ones. I would suggest that we're closer to the model of the future, frankly, with the success of the circulator that CODA is doing. And I would argue that some cars on High Street are okay. And I think parking on High Street is even more okay. But and sharing it with the bus system, I think, is important. I do think at some point, I've always felt that we should consider a transit center for downtown to deal with the quantity of buses on High Street. But I think what we have is closer to the model of the future.
Bill, you got a last question.
I'm Bill Lafayette. I'm owner of Regionomics and a CMC trustee. And my question winds up being a very close riff on Kent and Mark's questions. And that is the idea that we see through a glass darkly when we're looking at 35-year population projections. And if we're wrong about the demand for these large suburban lots, if they wind up being less than what we think they're going to be, because demographics will be different, might be different, do we have a plan to transition from one to the other without large declines in household wealth, blight in these suburbs, and that sort of thing?
So let me, just to make sure I got your question right, so if we are not aggressive enough in how we're looking at the demographic change?
If the demographic changes wind up causing the demand for these large suburban lots to be less than what we think they're going to be, do we have a plan to get from here to there?
I mean, first, a point of data. Right now, it shows that as soon as we can, we should stop building those. So we cannot do any less than that. I mean, the plan already says don't build new ones. What you have is enough to take care of us for the next 30, 40 years. So we don't have that situation where, it says build another 20% of them. It already says that slow down on this and start looking to denser single-family neighborhoods. I mean, that's, well, no, other than that, I mean, a good plan should always be flexible, and that's what Keith always tells me.
Yeah, I mean, the short answer to your question is no. Nobody has a plan. I don't think anybody's figured out what the implications are. And I do think, when you look at what that's going to mean potentially to families, you have the potential to see what happened to a lot of families in the urban core in the housing crisis happen in a different way to folks out in suburban areas that are not able to, look, there will always be demand for the large lot single family. It's not like suddenly someone is we're going to have the zombie apocalypse out in Powell and everyone will leave.
They'd make a TV show out of that.
I should just not start on those things. But it's not going to be as bad as you see in the Hilltop with depopulation, or in the things you see in Detroit. But yeah, it's something where those areas that do not maintain their value from a civic infrastructure, from the schools, from the amenities, those kinds of things are going to become very much more important, because that market is just going to become more competitive. So that's, if I was in an ex-urban community doing economic development, community development, that's where my focus would be.
Bill, thank you. I want very much for this audience that loves Columbus, knows Columbus well, to get onto getinsight2050.org. Look at this report. It is fascinating. Prior to Kermit saying goodbye, I want, on behalf of the panel, to thank you for your attendance, and I want to thank the panel for participation.
I hope you enjoyed today's forum. Boy, was it a great one. We encourage you to continue the conversation in the lobby over coffee and cookies. Remember that you can view and share all of our forums on CTV, Columbus Television, on WOSU and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel, and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Once more, thanks to our sponsors, Smith & Hale, Smoot Construction, and the Robert Weiler Company, and partner Urban Land Institute Columbus. And thanks to our speakers, Yaromir Steiner, Keith Myers, Steve Shoney, and Kyle Katz. And thanks to all of you. We look forward to seeing you again at CMC.